Shevona.
Correct.
Okay. Khethiwe, Fatima, and Darshni.
Yes.
Okay. Don't want to mispronounce anyone's name. All right, we'll start with you, Shevona. So just to remind you, the topic is when culture speaks louder than rules, a DEI versus belonging. So we'll start it off, and I believe one of our speakers did mention it today, part of belonging, also mentioned yesterday so much. So how does belonging then differ from your traditional concepts of diversity, equity, as well as inclusion, and why does this distinction matter in today's workplace?
Thank you. I think it's such an interesting question. And one of the best ways to describe the distinction between DEI and belonging for me is simply it's a house versus a home, right? So if you think of DEI, it's your house. It's what sets the foundation, your policies, your procedures, the standards, etc., that you put in place as an organization. Belonging is what truly makes it a home. That's where your employees feel connected, where they feel seen, where they feel heard. So you can have the perfect house, but if people don't feel at home, you've missed the point on belonging. Now, if we look at DEI and the changing landscape, you would see many organizations, I've seen it, and I'm sure most of you in the audience here have seen over the years how this has transformed. In recent years, DEI was once a buzzword, and all organizations had their taglines and their slogans and commitments towards it. But recently, there's been global legislative changes and political shifts that have impacted it. We see a lot of organizations actually backtracking on promises. However, those that are truly purpose-led have remained steadfast to their DEI commitment. And those are the ones that are now moving away from traditional DEI, metrics and representation, to belonging. Now, traditional DEI, representation in a country such as ours, I completely understand how important it is. But representation means having the right metrics. You can have the best metrics, like I said, perfect looking house, but you can still lack belonging because it's giving people a seat at the table, but no voice. And in that case, you've changed the optics, but not the culture. You're still a massive lag and still something that you are severely lacking. Now, we know that there are enough studies and data to show us that belonging, and when employees feel that sense of belonging, they are about 70% more likely to stay with an organization. We know the trends. We had some very engaging sessions yesterday on automation, globalization, and we spoke about what this means for us, especially in the people space or in the human resources space. Automation means how we're automating tasks, but things that can't be automated with algorithms are your strategy, your vision, your empathy. And that is where globalization comes in, because you're in that heightened war for human talent. You're looking for the strategists, the visionaries, the connectors. How do you attract them? Money is great. We understand the economy. It'll be an attraction measure. But how do you retain them? You need to look at something like belonging, moving away from just the metrics and the numbers to actually letting people feel seen and significant in an organization. Becomes your retention insurance for doing good business. And that's where I'll go back to my original metaphor. DEI is the house. Belonging is what makes it a home.
I love that you mentioned Prophet Luther Vandross, may his soul rest in peace, that a house is not a home. There's a song, literally, as soon as you said that, I just remembered that song. And I actually like the fact that you mentioned that, that house would be your DEI, and then the home would be the belonging. So I'm going to come to you, Khethiwe. Now we're in South Africa, right? In the South African context, we have different people, we have different cultures, and also our history also plays a huge part in that. So do tell me, how can organizations now addressing historical divides as well as lived experiences foster a true sense of belonging, creating that home?
Thank you so much. So I think for me, and probably also building on from the DEI versus belonging, I think for too long, we've stuck on just the D, right? In terms of, we bring in the difference in terms of hire the black female, the Indian male, the person with a disability. We haven't often moved to then the equity part, right, in terms of making sure that the person is supported to succeed within the organization.
Yes.
I think a lot of our work has been very much around the tick box approach in the local context, because when people have, that sense of equity and they're provided the support that they need, the output of that is they feel included. And then the byproduct of them feeling included is then the belonging. And when they belong, as Shevona mentioned, they want to build lifelong careers, right? So I think for me in the South African context is really important around the seeing people, right? And I think for us to also have difficult conversations and acknowledge those difficult conversations, but with respect, right?
Yes.
I'll give an example. So when I started looking after transformation at Accenture, I think one of the things my CEO said to me was, you need to have more of an aggressive approach, and I politely said to him that I am everything but aggressive. And I'm assertive, I'm firm, but I'm not aggressive. And also the aggression is what has been perpetuated throughout the years, right? Has it delivered the results? The stick approach, has it delivered the results? So what needs to happen is to engage the hearts and minds, right?
Yes.
And to have the human and the empathetic conversations and the real conversations around. You might not have experience and have a lived experience of someone in a rural setting, but if you can be empathetic towards that, you're then able to really leverage the DEI and see the individual and see the person, right? I'll give an example as well of, there was a young man, there's a scholarship that I ran, and in the scholarship, the young man actually came from rural Limpopo, first generation graduate, and studied at UCT. He completed cum laude and was then eligible for the graduate trainee program. He applied for the graduate trainee program and was declined by business. So I asked to see the report in terms of the data. Why is he declined?
Yeah.
The response was that he's too timid. So again, it's not understanding, right, and being empathetic in terms of where this young person comes from. And also that there is beauty in difference.
Yes.
I speak passionately about the fact that if your organization can't handle difference, it's not a culture, it's a cult.
Oh.
So it's really important to make sure that we do intentionally, I think, provide the space, because it's in that space where we then create the space for people to learn, right, around different cultures, different backgrounds and context, our history, that empathy and understanding is then developed.
Thank you for that. Fatima, Khethiwe speaks about speaking to the heart and also being seen, and then also makes a distinction between culture and a cult. So now we're trying to run away from the cult. So tell me, how do leaders now model it, right? Because sometimes it does come from the top all the way down to the bottom. So how do leaders then model that authenticity and the vulnerability to create a psychologically safe space where employees are seen, heard, and also are spoken to straight to the heart?
I think for me,
My bad. I thought she's sitting right there.
Fatima, yeah.
Yes, thank you.
I think for me, if we think about the concept of modeling and authenticity and vulnerability, it starts with basic but foundational, fundamental self-awareness as a leader. We've got to start there. We've got to do the work in terms of that deep introspection, sitting with ourselves in that silence and asking us key messages or stories or narratives that we hold about successful leadership, or what does success look like from a leadership perspective? What is the narrative that we're holding in terms of vulnerability or authenticity? And the reason that I say that is, for a long time, leadership equaled having it all together.
Yeah.
But we know that real credibility doesn't come from that. Real credibility comes from being honest.
Yes.
And in that honesty, we have vulnerability and authenticity. Imagine a leader says to their team, I made a mistake. And this is how I'm course correcting. In that moment, the impact that it's created for psychological safety is huge. As opposed to a leader saying, my door is always open. Yes, I'm inclusive. Yes, I'm, I care. But in that moment, what we are signaling to our employees is that it's okay to be human here. And simply by doing that, we're creating the space for listening and understanding. Now, what I'd like to do is layer that with, when we think about authenticity and vulnerability, it's tested, especially in moments that matter.
Yes.
Those moments where it makes us very uncomfortable as leaders. When somebody comes up to us and says and challenges the decision that you've made. Naturally, what I want to do is defend it. But here we're talking psychological safety. Here we're talking about being seen and heard as an employee. Instead of me as a leader going in and saying, but this is a decision we've made, why we've made it. It's always been done like that. Hence, these are the decisions we're making. As a leader, it's about pausing that reaction and listening and lean in. And imagine a leader says to you, let me see what you see.
Yeah.
Instead of sharing my response. And in that moment, because when we talk culture, it's about signals. In that moment, what am I signaling to my employees? You matter.
Yes.
Your voice is heard. And that's where we start to see psychological safety start to grow, trust starts to grow. But I think when I talk self-awareness, when I talk introspection, etc., and culture and inclusion, it goes hand in hand with well-being. So as a leader, I need to be able to model self-care. I need to model healthy boundaries. Because that's part of authenticity. That's part of being vulnerable as a leader. But I need to model it, not just talk about it. Because, I say, don't work at 1 o'clock in the morning. No, don't work when you're sick. Don't work when you're on holiday. But I'm the leader that does exactly that. Or I'll message you when you're on leave. I will message you on when you're sick. But as a leader, I need to make sure that I'm not signaling to people that I don't respect my health.
Yeah.
I don't respect my well-being. Also, what I'm signaling to my employees is that I don't value your health. I don't value you, the time that you're taking to revitalize, restore, reflect, etc.
Yeah.
So when we talk psychological safety, when we talk belonging, inclusion, etc., we're not just speaking about parts of an individual. We're talking about the entire individual.
Yeah.
And how do we create that space for inclusion, belonging, and safety? And as a leader, what do we expect from you? Model things like rest, reflection, restoration, because we all need it. We're all human. But I think what goes hand in hand with that is also congruency. So, saying one thing, but, your voice, your body language, your actions are completely different. I want to send a happy message to you, but I'm doing it with such frustration. So as a leader, modeling also includes the fact that we must look in the mirror, and when we're sharing this, how we're sharing it. Even that sends signals to the organization. And lastly, I think from a culture perspective, when we do work within the Santam space, we say to our leaders, you're culture carriers. Whether you like it or not, you're culture carriers. And I know there's debates around it in terms of that, but as a leader, you set the tone for the organization, the emotional tone of the organization.
Exactly.
And it's not, yes, we have a culture manifesto at Santam. We call it Live, Lead, and Serve the Santam Way. Our culture is all about the Santam Way. But we say to our leaders that the culture is not built in that handbook. The culture is built, that culture of inclusion, belonging, safety, etc., is built between the moments that you have with people, how you respond, how you deal with mistakes, how you deal with uncomfortable conversations.
Yeah.
Because that's where we start to see culture actually speaking louder than some of our rules.
I love that. Deshan, I'm going to come to you now. Fatima actually mentioned so many different examples and has also said that now we need to move away from the culture that is literally in the handbook, but rather of a culture that we can see and being modeled by the leaders that we have in our organizations. But I just want you to elaborate just a little bit further on this by just helping us to recognize what are the signs that an organization has moved from what Khethiwe said is a cult, where we're just ticking some boxes, to an organization that's actually truly living what they say.
So I just want to start off by saying thank you for asking us how we pronounce our names.
You're most
Because I think there's so much of power in that. There's so much of power in our names.
Yes.
And in the stories of our names as well. So I think when it comes to this question, my fellow panelists has touched on some of it. I especially love the cult part of it. When we talk about belonging, if we are talking about it as an HR conversation, then I think we've lost the plot completely. So as HR practitioners, this is an HR-led conversation, but ultimately it's a culture and it's a business conversation. So if it's not embedded in our culture, if it's not embedded in our purpose, if it's not embedded in our business strategy, then it really just is a compliance or a tick-the-box exercise.
True.
If we look at companies that are doing this really well, and I don't think there's any company that's ever getting it 100% right, because it's also, DEI is a moving conversation. It's evolving all the time. So there's no target. We're never there. But if I look at some of the things that make companies more successful than others in this conversation, does it start with leadership? So do our leaders really believe this? Is it, like I said, is it in our purpose? Are they walking the talk? Or is it just words that we put up on the wall? And we know that culture is not words that we put up on our wall. It's how our employees feel every day when they walk into our organization. We can't have this conversation without talking about psychological safety, of course.
100%.
So are there safe spaces for our employees to have these conversations? Are our minority groups in the organizations represented in some way? And when they are represented, do we really make them feel like they have a voice at the table or a seat at the table? Are we only doing once-off training and say we are DEI and belonging compliant? Or is it continuously embedded in our culture? Are we continuously learning? Are we looking at the different generations in the workplace and saying what is right for each of them in the workplace? So this is not a conversation about what we look like. It's a conversation about how do we feel and how do we allow our employees to thrive in our organizations. If we're not sure where to start, and if the audience is not sure where to start, Deloitte has a DEI maturity framework. And very quickly looking at that framework, you can plot exactly where your organization is and where we are on the different stages of maturity.
Yeah.
So when we talk about belonging, it's really about the feeling in our organizations. It doesn't mean that we have to be everything to everyone.
Yeah.
Because there are different organizations, there are different cultures for different people, and we've got to find where we best belong as well. But I think, as Khethiwe said, it's not about assimilating to a culture. It's about every employee being able to add to a culture.
Absolutely love that. So now there might be someone sitting here and saying, okay, part of my KPIs is to make sure there is diversity, equity, as well as inclusion. So now how do I even measure belonging as part of a KPI, but also using those insights and translating them so that we can actually use them as strategies to transform our culture? And anyone can take this one.
I'll take that. So I think the starting point, and I always speak about nothing that doesn't get measured gets done, right? So the starting point is the data, and it can be done in the form of, it could be an inclusion assessment, it could be in the pulse survey within the organization. And I think the most important thing, right, is once you've gathered this information from your employees who've trusted you with sharing their views, that's how psychological safety is built. You then follow through, right, in terms of, so what? That's how you then can then put in place programs that respond to those particular issues that have been identified. As Darshini mentioned, there is no endpoint to inclusion. There is no one organization that can say we have reached, the ultimate. There are also tools. So Darshini mentioned the Deloitte index. There's also the DEI ISO standard, which is a global standard around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that is the global standard and the blueprint around organizations building a roadmap, and I think often maybe organizations also get overwhelmed with wanting perfection. The most important thing is to start.
Yeah.
And I love the slogan from the disability inclusion sector that says, nothing for us without us. Because that's why the importance of the employee resource groups, right? Because you then engage with those minority groups that Darshini spoke about
Yes.
to then build programs that speak uniquely to their requirements so that they then feel included and they then ultimately belong within the organization. So I think the most important thing is having a view of where you are so that you can then start to build a roadmap. And as we mentioned, it's not overnight. It's a journey. There are organizations that have been on the journey for 15 years, 20 years, and it's ongoing. There is no end point because inclusion is ultimately making sure that we are catering, for each of those designated groups, those minorities, so that they do then belong within the organization.
No, 100%.
Can I just add to that?
Yeah, you can speak.
So I think that the quantitative measures are really important, but so is the qualitative as well. So your organization's listening strategy is also a really important resource point as well. So like I said, are you creating spaces where people feel free to speak up? You use your pulse surveys, like Khethiwe said, you use focus groups, etc., and getting a base of where your organization is at, but continuously measuring progress against that as well. Does the sentiment in the organization change over time? Not just does our numbers change?
Yeah. Absolutely, just loving this whole conversation, in fact. So now there might be someone listening to this conversation and just saying, look, I get that we want to belong, it's all kumbaya, but I don't think that we should just go into like the belonging and stuff, because those are just soft concepts. All I'm worried about, or all I care about, is making sure that we get profit, we get our clients, and our clients are happy, and that's that. But like, what is the risk of viewing belonging and culture as a soft concept rather than a strategic development for our employees to actually drive more performance from them? Yeah.
I think that's one of the best questions around this, is because it's always considered a soft concept. So yesterday, I had an amazing conversation with a gentleman during the networking session, and he's not in the HR field. Like we said, belonging, culture, it's not a people conversation. So I asked him, what are your thoughts on the first day? And he said, it's some great conversations, but as someone who's more in the operations part of the business, I find some of this a little bit fluffy. We're talking about trust. How do you measure these things? And it's the same with belonging. The question is, how do you measure it? So let's make it as clear as possible for businesses. In terms of profit, bottom line, how do you use belonging as a revenue enabler? And the research is out there, but let's look at the actual stats, right? If it impacts your turnover, when you've got greater belonging, you've got greater retention. I spoke about your retention insurance. That's one aspect of it. But what is the cost of turnover? It's between 30 to 200% of an employee's annual salary. That is what it costs to replace someone, dependent on their level within the organization. Because it's not just recruitment and onboarding. It's your strategic disruption, your loss of IP, your team impact, the list goes on. So if you can reduce your turnover, inevitably you are contributing towards the bottom line of the organization. That's one massive impact. It's a massive saving. Then it's your innovation drivers. When you create the sense of belonging, you're letting people actually be their true selves. You're letting them come to the party with different ideas. And we know the risk of groupthink. We know what that results in. But when you bring diverse minds with different ideas, you find creative solutions to problems you've been trying to look at for years. And that, again, impacts your bottom line. Yeah. So if we talk about actual rands and cents, how does that impact my bottom line? Use belonging as a revenue enabler. Use it to increase your productivity, reduce your turnover, and increase employee satisfaction, because in that way you are inevitably increasing your margin, looking at revenue generation, and that's why I say make belonging your revenue enabler for your people.
Yes, Khethiwe?
Yeah, so I'd like to add on to that. So I think one of the other elements that we often forget around the business case is, and it links to the innovation, right, is the more diverse your organization is, the better positioned you are to serve a diverse pool of clients.
Yes.
So that speaks to the long-term sustainability of the organization itself. So I always say that there is no part of DEI that is to an organization's disservice. If anything, it is to your own long-term sustainability.
Yes. And like the fact that both of you actually spoke so well into how it can actually just be an enabler to help your profit and just your revenue and your turnover to be so much better. And it's not just a fluffy thing that we just speak about just so that we can be cute in the organization. So just the last question on this, and I think each of you can actually get onto it. Aina actually spoke about it earlier and said, something around belonging, where sometimes if you want a promotion, you have to be on the golf course. If you want to be seen as part of the company, it's the fact that you need to stay after hours at the bar or whatever it might be. And we do know that the organization has people at different levels. And with those different levels, that also means that there might be certain cultures and certain levels of belonging that are created consciously or subconsciously. So then my question is, how can organizations then start to design systems, rituals, as well as everyday interactions that actually reinforce belonging at every level, all the way from onboarding to leadership development? And we can start with you, Fatima.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I think it's even before that. I think not even onboarding, but it also goes to employee brand. That employer brand also holds a story or narrative around a culture.
Yeah.
It holds the narrative around how do we do things around here in this particular organization. And then it says to me, do I want that job or not? So it starts there. It starts there even before onboarding. But when we look at the entire human capital life cycle, and when we look at almost threading in and threading the fabric of DEIB into everything that we do, I think there's important questions that we need to ask ourselves when we look at that. Because, for example, onboarding, it's all around asking, if I join this organization, would someone like me thrive here? Would someone like me develop here? Would someone like me belong?
Yes.
And in that, we must be able to say, does that answer some of the questions that we are asking ourselves as we look at onboarding, leadership development, etc. But I think it's also, I think we underplay the rituals that we have in an organization. And I bring it back to Santam simply because, I mean, we have something called Yellow Day, and you'll see we wear lots of yellow.
Like you today.
But it's done on purpose. And it's not just, it's more than the color yellow. So we have an annual Yellow Day. We celebrate it when we do our business results. And in that, when we celebrate our business results, we celebrate our culture at the same time. Because there's no way that we'll be able to reach that success without people and without inclusion, belonging, and safety.
Yeah.
And when we and be purposeful around the yellow, because for us it's about saying there's two things. Do I feel proud to wear my yellow? That's the first question we ask people. And do you feel comfortable wearing the yellow? And that's a ritual for us, because that ritual then signals to us what is actually coming in our way in creating that space where people feel like they belong, they're included, and their psychological safety.
Yeah.
So I think that's that. But also in that, it's the stories that we tell.
Yeah.
Because in storytelling tells your story of your organization throughout the organization.
Yeah.
So what are those stories that's in the system, and how do you build around those stories? Good stories or bad stories?
100%. Thank you, Fatima. Shevona?
I think for me, it comes down to authentic leadership. And you're unable to create this culture or create cultural shifts without authentic leadership and buy into it. So we spoke about the business case for it. We spoke about the revenue enablers. Now it's about taking your business leaders on the journey of understanding the value of this and getting the authentic buy-in. I know you brought it back to Santam. I bring it back to my organization. It's exactly the same. From a leadership perspective, we don't drive anything inclusion-driven from a people perspective. It's always from operations. It's from the business leaders, because they want to see people in our organization not survive, but thrive. And when you shift that mindset, that's when you get to the secret sauce of changing it. And let's not underestimate the power that each and every one of us in this room has. You have the power to do that for someone else. You have the power to create the space for someone else. You have the power to change and transform the life of someone else. So when you look at it, when you go back into your organizations, take your leaders on the journey, but also never underplay your role in transformation and ensure that you're committed to it. Again, like Khethiwe said, break the cult, create good culture. Like I said, move away from the house. The house is beautiful. Start building the homes.
Yeah, lovely. Khethiwe?
I think for me, it's really around moving beyond seeing DEI as a project, but it's ongoing and embedding it, as we mentioned, into the organization. And it's the way of things are done in the home, as Shevona said. You know, because I think if we continue to see it as a tick box and a project, we lose out on the benefit, right, of making sure that ultimately what we want to make sure is people feel seen, they feel heard, and they feel that they can show up every single day as their authentic self without having to cut parts of themselves out. That can only happen when it is embedded into the way of doing business.
Thank you. Darshini, just close it off.
So I think belonging is the responsibility of everyone in the organization, but the role modeling and the storytelling from leadership is really important. It's important for people to see leaders as human beings as well, and that's something that we all can connect with. I won't repeat anything that any of the panelists have said, but I do want to say that if you are a young person in the organization, it is some of the responsibility does fall on you for your own career path as well. So don't rule out, I can't cycle, or I can't golf, or I can't run. Try it as well. You actually might find that it's something that you end up loving.
100%.
So don't assimilate to the culture, but see what can I add to the culture.
100%. Well, thank you, ladies. I really think you brought out some really great points just to help us through DEI, in fact, versus culture. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Let's give them a huge round of applause.